The left is pro-open borders. The left is woke. The left is fully pro-trans. The left is all communism and socialism now, and Marxism, etc., etc., etc. How much truth is there to add these? How much truth is there actually to these so-called claims? Let's talk about it. Hey there, folks. It's Javier here. I'm coming to you live. It is currently, actually it's 4 p.m. where I am, but it's 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's where I started recording these things, so I've just been keeping Eastern Standard Time. But I came across an article, and not just an article, but also just came across known facts about immigration, about, how the Republican Party, not so much the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party itself has shifted its tone on immigration. And not just this, but the fact is that the Republican Party, I'm going to give you my opinion, and you're free to disagree. But on the particular issue of immigration, by the way, we're going to be talking about a number of topics. We're going to be talking about immigration first. We're going to be talking about the whole trans debate. We're going to be talking about the whole woke debate. And we're also going to be talking about the whole communism, socialism, Marxism, that's all the Democrats are debate. We're going to be discussing all of that in this video. So, first of all, to get started here, the Republican Party, the truth will tell you today, the Trump, MAGA, Groyper, America First, Hard Right, whatever Republican Party, whatever the hell this is today, will tell you that the Democrats are open borders. Will tell you that the Democrats just want to let in illegals and MS-13 and import everybody from third world countries, etc., etc., etc. And they're lying to you. They're lying to you. Ronald, I'm going to give you an opinion that's going to be controversial, but this opinion is the truth. In my opinion, this opinion is the truth. Ronald Reagan would be an open borders Democrat today. Ronald Reagan would be an open borders Democrat today. Yeah, I said it. Ronald Reagan himself quoted, "I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down their roots and lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally." Ronald Reagan said this in 1984. Again, I read to you. Oh, shoot. Again, I read to you. Give me a second. I don't know what's going on. "I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down their roots and lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally." Ronald Reagan, 1984. Who was the United States president that gave amnesty to over 2.7 million so-called illegal aliens? Who was it? Was it Joe Biden? Was it Barack Obama? Was it Bill Clinton? Or was it Ronald Reagan? It was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 2.7 million undocumented immigrants who were in this country for a long time, who may have at one point entered this country, without documentation, undocumented. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to these people, guys. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 2.7 million undocumented immigrants. Today's Republican Party wants freaking mass deportations. Ronald Reagan is a far cry from today's Republican Party. Ronald Reagan is an open borders Democrat. He was an open borders Democrat by today's definition. Republicans back then, Ronald Reagan, George Bush I, George Bush Jr., they supported immigrants. Ronald Reagan's stance is no different than the stance Democrats hold today. Common sense Democrats hold the stance today that we should give amnesty to people who have lived here for ages. Common sense Democrats today hold the stance that we should provide pathways to citizenship for people who have been living here peacefully for ages, who have been living here peacefully for a long time. I'm a grandson of Chilean immigrants. God bless. Yo soy nieto de una abuela chilena. I'm a grandson of Chilean immigrants. So, this is just the reality, folks. This open borders crap, you've been lied to. What do Democrats really want? Democrats want to give amnesty to people who have lived here for years and years and years, who have been paying their taxes, and who have been living here peacefully, who may have at one point come undocumented. We want to give them amnesty, yes, because we support that. Why is this a radical decision? Why is this a radical view? It's the right and the Christian. It is the right and the Christian thing to do. Ronald Reagan supported it. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 2.7 million undocumented immigrants. I'm going to read you the article. I'm just going to go and read you the article. As the nation's attention turns to the fractious debate on immigration, it might be helpful to remember in 1986, Ronald Reagan signed a sweeping immigration reform bill into law. God bless him. God bless him. What a difference from today. It was sold as a crackdown, but there would be tighter security at the Mexican border and employers would face strict penalties. But the bill made any immigrant who entered the country before 1982 eligible for amnesty, a word not usually associated with the factor of the modern day conservatism. Nick Fuentes calls for mass deportations. Tucker Carlson calls for mass deportations. Charlie Kirk called for mass deportations. Donald Trump at one point called for mass deportations. I don't really know so much today, but that's what ICE is doing, going in all these states and all these places, rounding up hardworking people to take them to their detention facilities and deport them. We should stop wanting that. If they're here living peacefully, and if they've been here for a long time, let's give them amnesty. And yes, of course, we should support border security. But we should also reform the immigration system so that people who want to come here can have an easier process. Charlie Kirk was for making the process a lot harder. But the people here, we should want to make a far easier process for people to come in this country. Are we not the richest nation in the world? One of the richest countries in the world? Are we not the honey pot of the world, if you will, for people everywhere? People look to America and Africa and India. That's why they're always scamming us, by the way. They look to America everywhere around the world. They want to come here. I've spoken to foreigners that want to come here. It's crazy. It's crazy. But the reality of the matter is that we are just seen as this honeypot of the world. We are one of the richest nations on earth. We have the so-called American dream. We have the so-called land of opportunity. So let's reform. This is what we Democrats want. We Democrats, I'm not really a Democrat, I'm an independent, but I'm speaking on behalf of Democrats because that's where I lean. But what Democrats want comprehensive immigration reform. We want to reform the process to make it easier. Conservatives and hard-right Republicans want to make the process harder because they're afraid that whites are going to be the minority in this country. And if they are at one point, who cares? Who cares if white people become the minority in this country? What do you have to be afraid of? What do you have to be afraid of if you just so happen to be the minority in this country? Moving on. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is, continuing on, trans. Oh, crap. Okay, so we just talked about open borders and immigration and all that stuff. Today, we're going to talk about trans and all the fear-mongering about trans in women's restrooms, trans in sports, transitioning your children because the Democrats want to transition all your children into the opposite sex, or whatever, give sex change children to children. How often does that actually happen? Like almost never. First of all, almost never. Okay, so let's break down the facts. Gender, okay, we're going to be real here. I'm going to be real here and break down the facts. Yes, I will grant you, it is true that gender affirming care does mean, replacement, gender operations, optional for kids who identify this way. Should kids be allowed to change their gender if they wanted to? A moral question. I'm going to tell you my moral answer is no. I don't believe they should. That's my personal opinion. I'm personally against all, sex change surgeries and operations on children and adults. I'm personally against that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be imposing my view on the law, if you will. But at the same time, as I've said before, many, many, many times, on the trans issue, there is so much fear-mongering going on about trans people on the right that I feel like I'm obligated to have to defend them. Like, I'm serious about that. I feel obligated to defend them because they are constantly fear-mongering and demonizing this community, painting this community out to be terrorist and dangerous and mentally ill. And I don't agree with that. I think that needs to stop. Because no matter what you think of trans people, whether we understand them or not, whether we agree with them or not, or understand them or not, trans people are a marginalized community. And what do Democrats do? Democrats are the party that protects and stands up for marginalized communities. They're not pushing trans on children. They're not pushing children to go get sex changes. They're not pushing this or that on children. Stop believing the hype. Stop believing the lies. Democrats are called to protect marginalized communities. That's the truth, and that's the reality of the matter. Democrats protect the LGBT community. They defend them because they are a marginalized community. Trans people are a marginalized community, and that's why Democrats stand up for them through legislation and laws and all that stuff. But nobody except maybe some, I don't even know, corporate funded or whatever, I don't even know, outside of politics is trying to push trans on children. Nobody's doing that. Nobody in politics is trying to push your kids to change their gender. Trans people are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people. That's just the reality of it. Like I told you, morally, I disagree with sex change surgeries. Altogether, I disagree. I don't believe anybody should be morally speaking, I don't believe anybody should be changing their gender. I don't believe that. I don't believe children should. I don't believe adults should. I disagree with sex change surgeries. But for the people who have changed their gender, let's discuss them. Some of them, granted, have done a pretty good job at it. I'm not going to lie. They have. Blair White, for example. Blair White. You can't tell this woman was ever a man. So out of respect for Blair White, I'm going to call her a she. Because she so clearly is a woman. She so clearly is now pretty much 100% woman at the moment. Despite being born male, she is clearly like 100% woman, Like, for example, and I've seen trans people that have transitioned, that have done such a good job at it, you can't ever tell that they were at one point the opposite gender. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've seen trans people who have, on the other side of the spectrum, I've seen trans people who have done such a terrible job at it and are literally just men in dresses calling themselves women and demanding people to call them a woman. Fuck that. Yeah, I said it. Fuck that. I don't respect those people. I don't respect men in dresses demanding people to call them woman, okay? I don't respect men in dresses going into women's restrooms. I don't respect that. I don't respect that. I'm sorry if I'm angering some progressives on here, but I really don't respect that. I do respect the people who are trans, who have actually completely changed themselves. Like they are now literally, how can you not call Blair White a woman? Like seriously. And why would we make Blair White, who is completely female right now, have to use a men's restroom? Why would we do that? Why would we do that? That's just mean. That's just mean. You know, why would we make a fully transitioned person who completely, you can never tell they were ever the opposite gender, why would we make them have to use a men's restroom? So for this reason and this reason alone, I'm not in agreement, and I admit it's a complex issue. But for this reason and this reason alone, I'm not in agreement with the idea of, you know, banning trans people from restrooms, because like there are literally people who have like transitioned entirely, like literally entirely. And it's like, how can you demand that a person who 100% looks like a woman who happened to be born a male uses the men's restroom, or vice versa? You know? I don't know. I'm not in agreement. And by the way, I voted against that in Massachusetts in 2018. But at the end of the day, there are trans people out there who are very genuine. Like genuine. They do exist. Like literally, they do exist. I personally met trans people who have never had a surgery. They never had a surgery. Literally, guys, they've never had a surgery. Like, they said they've never had any hormones, sex change operations, surgeries, any of that. They've never had that. They really have never had that. So, basically, just once again, using Blair White again as an example, with due respect to Blair White, why should she ever have to use the men's restroom? Yeah, she may have been born a male in her childhood. Why should she ever have to use the men's restroom? She doesn't look like a man at all. At all anymore. At all. So, you have my take. People like that, at the end of the day, people who look like Blair White, who were maybe at one point were the opposite gender, but now have just fully accustomed and transitioned into being the gender that they claim to be today, why should we ban them from using that restroom? Why should we do that? Like, I don't agree with that. I really don't. I don't agree with that. Why should we ban them from using that restroom? And then we could talk about the whole biological men and women sports. Okay. I suppose so. It is true, granted, that it's an unfair advantage if they still hold traits of a biological male. So maybe we can draw the line on that. Like, that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the case. There shouldn't be biological people who have transitioned in men's sport. And even Caitlyn Jenner agrees on that, you know? Caitlyn Jenner, let's see how woman she looks. Well, she's an old one these days, but... okay, so... do you think that she should be allowed to use the men's restroom? Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't think so. I don't know. But I don't know. The point is that the very small minority of trans people out there who, one way or another, have become pretty much the entirely opposite gender. Like, one way or another, have become pretty much entirely the opposite gender. Like, why should we be... I'm sorry, pardon me. Let me just rephrase that. I'm not going to talk about restrooms again. I already did. But people who have transitioned entirely, who have become like the entirely opposite gender, like, we can't even tell remotely that there were ever a gender before. The reality is this, and this is a bold reality. they are still a marginalized community that needs to be protected from discrimination. And that's what Democrats are doing. That's the legislation Democrats are passing. Republicans don't care about them at all. Republicans don't care about them. Republicans demonize them. But the reality of the matter is that people like Blair White and many others who have fully transitioned like her, excuse me, let me decline that call. People like Blair White and many others who have fully transitioned like her are basically the opposite gender now. And that's just what it is. And other people who may have never even had a sex change surgery, operation, or hormones, etc., who literally came out one gender and ended up the other, which does happen, by the way. I believe it does happen. I've met people who have claimed that, unless they're lying, but I don't think they are. No matter what, genuine trans people are a marginalized community, and we need to have laws that protect them. And that's what Democrats want. Don't listen to the lies out there that say Democrats are trying to trans your kids. That's a lie. All right? We need to have laws to protect marginalized communities, and that includes genuinely transitioned trans people. And I suppose the last thing I want to say on this is, and it's something I touched on earlier, it's like, what about the moral or Christian question of that? Like, Christian-based moral question of that. Like, seriously. Well, I've already stated my personal view. My personal view is I don't believe people should be getting sex change operations or sex change surgeries or having hormones pumped. I don't believe in any of that. I'm morally against that. But while being morally against that, I'm still going to stand up for people who did, because I recognize that people are a marginalized community. Like I said, the fine line is I respect the people who have actually transitioned to being who they are. I don't respect men and women's dresses going out there and pretending to be women and actually giving real, genuine trans people a bad name, by the way. And I think that Blair White and Caitlyn Jenner would fully agree with me on that. But nonetheless, where I disagree, because I know they're both conservative influencers who are trans, by the way, is that we need to have laws to protect marginalized communities, including trans people. And that's what Democrats are fighting for, and that's the moral thing to do, since these people exist, since they're a marginalized community. But from a personal moral standpoint, I don't believe people should be getting sex change surgeries or operations. I think that it is something certainly very different in the culture today, and that is granted. But I don't judge people, and I'll fight and defend them. From a political and moral standpoint, I'll fight and defend these people from any kind of persecution, lies, or discrimination or demonization of the right. And that is my stance on that. Next, we're going to talk about woke. Woke. Okay. So basically, woke. They're pushing LGBT on kids. They're pushing trans on kids. Companies are displaying pride flags or whatever. Oh, the LGBT flag has gone woke because they included Black Lives Matter and trans in the flag and all that stuff. We gotta get rid of Cracker Barrel. We gotta boycott Cracker Barrel because of woke this and woke that. You know how it's sound. You know how it's going. So I say what I want on here. This is my, if you will, this is my little podcast that probably doesn't have much traction yet. I don't know if it'll ever get much traction in the future. I'm still a nobody in there. But woke means educated. Woke means educated and well-read. You read books. You are smart, educated, etc., etc. You're aware of the prejudices in society. Okay? And to me, that's Christian. To me, it's Christian to say xenophobia is wrong. To me, it's Christian to say homophobia and racism are wrong. To me, it's Christian to say transphobia is wrong. Okay? I'm going to leave it there. It's Christian to say, I recognize that trans people are being heavily discriminated against in society, and I want to defend them from that discrimination. I recognize that trans people's lives are in danger, their suicide rates are high, and that they're being heavily demonized by the far right today, and I want to defend them from that discrimination. That's what woke means. Woke means I recognize that I don't know what it's like, and I'm not white, by the way, I don't know what it's like to be a black person in this society. In my entire life, I will never know what it's like to be a black person in this society. I will never know. I will never know what it's like to go into a supermarket and be targeted for the color of your skin. I will never know that. You know? I'll never know what it's like to be somebody who is, who is transitioned, if you will, going into a woman's restroom and being afraid of being beat up by somebody. I don't know. I will never know what it's like. I'll never know what it's, recognizing the fact that, that gay people have been discriminated against from being allowed to marry for so long. And now half the country is now against their rights. We're aware of what's going on in society, for example. And the reality of woke, and I'm being honest with you, I'm being real with you guys. Because that's who I am. I'm real. The reality of woke is recognizing your own privilege, if you will. It's recognizing your own privilege, say, as a straight, white, Christian man. Recognizing your own privilege, that many people don't have those privileges. I'm discriminated against sometimes by people when I'm on comment sections and they see that I have a Spanish last name and they say, oh, I'm going to call ICE on you. Oh, shouldn't you have self-deported by now? Yeah, they tell me that. And I speak as good English as I come. They tell me that. I'm a very, very, very Americanized person of Latino origin. I'll always be proud of that Latino origin. I'll always be proud of it. It's in my bloodstream. It's in my heart. Chile is in my heart. Mexico is in my heart on my dad's side. Chile on my mom's side, Mexico on my dad's side. I'm freaking proud of it because that's who I am in my heart. And yes, I'm an American who has visited so many states in this country. But yeah, I still get people telling me that I should self-deport, that I should be deported, that I'm going to call ICE on you. I got people telling me that all the time. All the time. They don't even know me. And their prejudice against people who are not straight, white, and Christian are showing. Straight, white, male, and Christian are showing so hard. So the whole idea of woke, first of all, it's being educated, it's being smart, it's being, well-read, understanding of society, understanding of history, and aware of the struggles that people face in life. Poor people, immigrants, Spanish people, trans people, gay people, Asian people, everybody, even Muslims. They make up society. They make up a culture of who we are in America. Because America is a country of diversity. And I have people in X that I'm watching that are saying that America is not a nation of immigrants. Stop saying that. We are a nation of immigrants, and we need to say that unapologetically. We need to be unapologetic in recognizing the truth about America is that everybody here is different. Everybody here is different. Everybody here faces their own struggles and pains in society. Trans people are not treated equally. Gay people are not treated equally. Black people are not treated equally. Spanish people are not treated equally. Muslims are definitely not treated equally. I'll never know like I said earlier, I'll never know what it's like to be black and walk into a store and have cameras following you around. That's why we have to say Black Lives Matter. As Christians, if you're a Christian, we have to say Black Lives Matter. Yeah, we can talk about the founding of the movement and some black lesbians founded it or whatever, but the message is important. So there's so much demonization of woke by the hard right, by the political right, without really knowing or caring what it means. It just means being first of all, educated, well-read, smart, understanding of society, understanding of history, and just being aware of what people face that are not you. They like to demonize white liberals and all that. Well, I think white liberals are more understanding. Being aware of what it's like to be a woman. Being aware of what it's like to be a gay person. Being aware of what it's like to be a trans person. Being aware of what it's like to be a black person. Being aware of what it's like to be a Hispanic. Being aware of what it's like to be a Muslim. We don't have to agree with all of them. We don't have to agree with their religion or their lifestyles or any of that. But we as Christians, and I am going to use it, as Christians, should be aware of what they go through for being marginalized communities in this country. And that's what woke means. That's what woke means. And that's just the reality and the truth about it. And that's all there is. That's all there is to it. That's all that woke is, like I said, I went down the long list, but also most importantly, and not last, but most importantly, but not least, being aware of what people who are not like you go through. Empathy, understanding, empathy, understanding these stuff. So that's the truth about it. And then they like to so basically, to sum up so far, we talked about the open borders, how Ronald Reagan was basically an open borders Democrat. We talked about the trans people, how, what they've gone through in their lives and how we don't have to agree with their lifestyles. We don't have to agree with them, but we do have to fight for them for being, if they're being targeted of hate and discrimination like they are today so much. So don't listen to, Democrats, don't listen to the hard right screaming that the Democrats are all open borders. The Democrats are on par with Ronald Reagan. True, genuine, what am I saying? True, genuine, True, genuine, sensible Democrats are on, which are the majority of them, by the way, are on par with Ronald Reagan on immigration. Democrats defending of trans people are about defending marginalized communities, all marginalized communities. All marginalized communities, whether you like it or not, include LGBT. Whether you like it or not. You don't have to agree with it, but it's what it is. Woke, being aware. Like, why are we demonizing woke? Woke is a good thing. Woke is, and they like to talk about, woke, and every time they put a pride flag up or whatever. But the basic concept of woke should never be demonized. It's empathy. Don't let anybody tell you that empathy is a bad thing. Don't let Elon Musk or Charlie Kirk tell you that empathy and realizing that people go through things that you will never understand is a bad thing. Never, ever, ever let people tell you that. That's the basic definition of woke. Continue to be intelligent, well-read, educated, understanding of history, etc. And be woke, because that's a good thing. The basic definition of woke is and always will be a good thing. So don't let Republicans lie to you about any of this stuff. Okay, so communism and socialism. Communism and socialism. Okay. What do we do? Let's just go for Mondami and Sanders. Let's just pull those two out to discuss this one. No, the Democrats aren't communists. For sure not communists. Real communists are people that ran Cuba and people that ran Venezuela and people that ran, Soviet Russia, Stalin, all that stuff. No, Democrats aren't advocating taking from the rich and giving it to the poor and making everybody equal from society. Democrats aren't advocating, ending all rich people. Democrats aren't advocating for that. None of that. That's communism. Doesn't exist in this country except for small fringe minorities. Will never exist. Has no place in the Democratic Party. But for services that we should be supportive as Christians. Services we should be supportive as Christians. And I've gone through the list many, many, many times. Universal health care. Why is that a debate? Why is this socialism and communism? Why is universal health care socialism and communism? People need health care. End of it. We should all pay into it. It's just what it is. Universal child care. We are pro-life, pre-birth, and post-birth. Pro-life, whole life. Anybody who is pro-life, pre-birth and post-birth should support Mondami's vision of universal child care. That's what it is. That's just what it is. And then we talk about all this stuff about, we have already discussed the facade of the open borders. We have already discussed the facade of, all this other stuff, like the facade of open borders and all that hell. We've already talked about that, but basically, the constant thing is that, that when you talk about healthcare, universal child care, when we talk about, protecting people from gun deaths, that's not trying to take away your guns. Communists might want to take away your guns. The Democratic Party is not communist, Protecting people from gun deaths, gun deaths that would have saved Charlie Kirk's life. Gun reform is a common sense policy that Christians should be advocating for. Christians should be voting for gun reform. We want to make a change, and we should be on the front lines. Christians should be on the front lines of making a change in this country to guns, gun legislation, all that stuff. Because of all the massive epidemic of mass shootings in this country. Yes, I agree. I will grant you a point. It is also a spiritual problem. It is also a spiritual problem. But it's also a problem that we do need to take action on. That's not communism. That's common sense. That's what we should want. Immigration reform, not socialism, not communism. Amnesty for people who've been living here for ages, not socialism, not communism. Paying taxes. We're all paying taxes, right? It doesn't fly, it doesn't make sense. There is no socialism or communism, and there is no communism in this country. Socialism might be growing a little bit, honestly, but democratic socialism, in my opinion, is not the same thing. There is no communism in this country at all. No Democrat is advocating for stealing from the rich and giving to the poor and equalizing wealth and taking away all your guns and all that. Not a single Democrat's doing that. We want gun reform because it's a common sense and it's Christian. We want health care because that's common sense, it's Christian, and it's what we should want to do. And a whole long list of other things. So I hope this helps. I hope to have exposed. I hope this helps. Democrats aren't pushing trans on your children. Democrats aren't pushing communism. Democrats aren't, woke is something that at the minimal definition should be embraced, not demonized, and the right lies about it and demonize it. And nobody's calling for open borders. Democrats certainly aren't and never have been. We're on par with Reagan. Thank you for watching. Sorry you're here tuning in.